Thanks everybody for coming. We were going to leave the house lights on today because we're not showing any slides or anything, and to encourage a spirit of conversation. So that's why we have them up. And I wanted to welcome you all to Grand Rounds today. Today's Grand Rounds is entitled The Roads Ahead, Senior Colleagues' Reflections on Career and Life Beyond Yale. I'm very excited to hear from the people we've invited, and I hope this will be a wonderful conversation that we get started today. So I wanted to start brief remarks. I wanted to particularly thank Sam Ball, who's right there, and Kellen Gersick, over here, for all the work they've done to make this Grand Rounds possible. And I just want to take a moment about some housekeeping issues. So number one, I'm going to provide some preliminary background information about how we got to today's event. Two, Kellen will provide us with some insights that he's gleaned from previous activities within the department. And just as a word of introduction about Kellen, he's an organizational psychologist who recently returned to CT following a successful career in the private consulting business he had founded. He was a member of our department from 1975 to 1984 as both a fellow and an assistant professor, primarily at the Consultation Center. Correct? Mm-hmm. He joined Sam and me in, God, it must be almost 2 years ago, as we began to explore what it means to grow old in the service of the department. So I've picked this potentially groan-inducing term to illustrate a point. One of the hardest things was to even come up with words about what we're talking about here today. Although it is a celebration, it's hard to put words to this and what exactly it is. I'm hoping this presentation will help clarify that. So then, third, and I think most importantly, our three invited emeriti will each provide their personal experience on the transition from full-time faculty in our department. And we have, from your right to left, Steve Bunney, with I think it was a 40-year career in the department and 20 years as our chair. George Heninger, a leading researcher on the third floor and mentor to several generations of faculty here. And Selby Jacobs, my predecessor as the CEO at CMHC. And so following that, and why I want to get through this quickly, is that I really want us to have a wide-ranging discussion following their presentations to further this discussion. So to provide some background quickly, my thinking about today's event began several years ago when John Crystal and I noted on several occasions that we had had very similar conversations with senior members of the department, where their understanding of the kind of support Yale would offer them in retirement was not clear to them. 70 years old is not a good time to find out that you don't actually have a retirement plan. And this happened on several occasions. So initially I started working on improving education about finances for the more senior members, and I include myself in that category of the department. And that was a very frustrating experience. Went round and round for several months. Nothing seemed particularly useful, and certainly not another lecture. Then Sam and I were introduced to Kellen, and we started thinking about it might actually be fun if we formed a group of senior faculty and asked them just about what their experiences in the department had been over their time here. And out of this group came the idea of beginning this discussion through a Grand Rounds, illustrating just some of the trajectories that we have found. Our guinea pigs, or should I say invited guests, have been very gracious in their participation. So now I actually wanted to finish with a very important caveat that all the three of us have thought a lot about. And here I want to quote at length from something that Sam wrote, and I thought put it very well. So we are aware that at Yale and most medical schools, the senior positions have been historically held by white men, and that change here and elsewhere has been slow. Although the department in psychiatry, in comparison to other academic departments, has a stronger representation of women at the professorial rank and in leadership positions, we still have a long way to go. Specifically, out of our 10 emeritus professors, none are women, and one is a member of a minority group. Of our 60-plus-year-old professors, of which there are 23, 4 are women and none are minorities. And of our less than 60-year-old professors, of which there are 33, 9 are women and 1 is a minority. Now, no women chose to join the original group that we set up, It was an email that was just sent to everybody of a certain age in the department. And as we move forward with initiatives for junior and senior faculty, we hope there'll be many more changes and more opportunities for relevant discussions about career transitions over the coming years. So I talked at some length. Please join me in welcoming Kellen to the podium.
Thanks. Well, it's great to be back in CMHC, which was my stomping grounds for 10 years, but also to see this audience in particular. We didn't know who this would appeal to. I'm very glad to see that that the audience is younger than the presenters, which is a good sign for the way we're going to approach this topic. I'm going to just talk for 10 or 15 minutes about the history, a little bit of the longer history of adult development research in the department, but also about this group in particular and what the group discussed last year during our sessions. My mentor was a psychologist by the name of Dan Levinson, who some of you may have known and worked with when he was here upstairs. And his field was adult development, which is the course of normal adult life. And his signature work was Seasons of a Man's Life, which was about the midlife transition that he and a group of us did, and then followed by Seasons of a Woman's Life, which was his follow-up book on research on women. And around sometime in the 1980s, I'm not sure when exactly, he said, okay, we finished the work on midlife. His theory of adult development included life being divided into these big eras, 20-year eras, 10-year periods that everyone goes through. The content is different, the issues are different, but the developmental process is very consistent. And he said, what I'm really interested now is in the transition between middle adulthood and late adulthood. The decades of the 60s and the 70s of how people reflect on their life to that point and plan the life that remains. And so we actually ran a group. This was he and Boris Astrachan, other name from the past that I'm sure some of you remember. We ran a group of departmental faculty, senior faculty, as a sort of self-study group to think about share their experiences. It was a very powerful experience. And then I left town, and Dan went on to finish the women's book, and then never came back to it. But his idea was this was the topic he wanted to come back to in the later part of his life, and he never had the chance. So for me, 2 years ago, I was at a dinner party with Bob Rothbuck, and I was at a dinner party, and the idea came up that, oh, you do adult development. You know, the department is thinking about some of the new opportunities about retirement and about financial planning and so forth, and maybe there's a connection there. And I met with Chairman Crystal, and we talked about it, and that overlap led to the group that was formed. Now, I don't know anything about financial planning or about retirement. That's not my thing. I know about adult development, and that was my interest. So we merged the two issues and presented that out to the faculty, and ended up having a 10-week session, one a week, where 9 of us got together for a couple hours upstairs and talked about this stage of life, including issues of changing work role, but not limited to that. And that's what the group was about. And following that, from the beginning, John and Michael and Sam they thought of this not as an event or as a group, but as reopening something that Yale had been the leader of 30 years ago. The idea of thinking about what is the role the department can play in reflecting on, thinking about research, thinking about writing, thinking about service to its own faculty, but also service to the field and the world in general about thinking about this stage of life and about the changes that happen and how to anticipate those changes in the middle of life, in the decades that lead up to. So you don't suddenly, as Michael said, you don't suddenly wake up one morning at 70 and say, now what do I do? Now what's my life about? Now what can I afford? Now what do I care about? Now how do I spend my time? But it'd be something that is present in the minds of the 45-year-old and the 35-year-old to some extent. Okay. So what I want to do is say a little bit, not too much detail, but a few minutes about what emerged from this very unstructured conversation, these 10 weeks across the time. And it was a great, for me, it was a wonderful experience of connecting and sharing and talking. And I'm going to tell you just a sentence or two about 8 topics that emerged as we talked. One that emerged was finances. Now, as Michael said, the group we had was a group of senior emeritus faculty. It was a relief to all of them to recognize with each other that they felt reasonably comfortable about finances. That their way of looking at it was that having enough didn't solve problems, but it made the solution of problems possible. And that they felt relatively comfortable, relatively well positioned in relation to the department, to their own lives. And that was not the thing they worried about. They said, but the great unknown, of course, is how long you live. And the anxiety in the back was, will I outlive what I have accumulated? But beyond that general question, that was not the motivating worry that came to the surface. The second thing we talked about, topic 2, was career. And this general sense was that the transition, the stepping away part of career, didn't happen all at once. For most of them, and for the people they knew, it happened in a stepwise function. And that at some point, there was a moment of giving up authority, roles of authority, and that preset a later moment, which was the idea of giving up obligation. That is, that it moved through the formal role, changes in formal role, and then changes in activity, in action. And those didn't happen at the same time for most people in this department. Not for everyone, but most people in this department. But universally, the issue that emerged from this group was it's not about role, actually. It's about primarily the very strong felt need to continue to feel useful, making a contribution, productive, in a real way, not in a symbolic way, not in a sort of respectful, hollow way. The idea of still feeling as a part of their career that they had something to offer that pushed forward their research interests, the organization, the field, the body of knowledge, and so forth, over and over again was the strong message. That's what counted. Being useful counted, not being powerful at this stage in career. They came to the idea that instead of talking about retirement, which none of them felt comfortable with, they wanted to talk about preferment. It sounds like something with the military, I know, but what they meant was, what was fundamentally different, and which they were enhancing to the degree they could, was the fact that they had more control now over what they did, how they invested their effort, and their energy, and their time. And I say that the key theme is increasing the ability to keep investing in things that really bring satisfaction and getting out of the things that do not. And I bet you will all identify with this, they sort of agreed that for most of their careers, less than half of their jobs had been preferred. That they had spent more time doing the things they had to do than the things they really were passionate about doing. And that had been chronic for decades. But that at this stage in life, there was the opportunity, more or less, to become more preferred in the way they invested their effort. Third topic we talked about a little bit was Yale. A lot of variable experiences about Yale. The only commonality I would say is that they felt that within the department, there was some interesting and deserved reflection, distinctions between clinicians, clinical faculty, and basic researchers, and that it's an issue for the department to try and integrate not just the content across that boundary, but the lifestyle, the work style, the personality style across that boundary was an interesting issue we talked about, didn't reach any conclusions about, but they felt it was a critical dynamic in the department. And also the dynamic between tenured and non-tenured faculty. I think the only thing we could say about the sense of Yale was that in some ways those were more consequential to them than place, because we had people in the group from different locations around. But the issue of tenured, non-tenured, the issue of clinical versus research faculty, that blending those professional identities into a department was a continuing and ongoing challenge. And they were interested in the way Yale and the department approached that. And it was worth further study, worth sort of feeding that back to it's not news to the chairman, or to any of you. But they also said that they would convey to their younger colleagues that the connection to Yale and the feeling about Yale seemed to be getting stronger rather than weaker as they moved through this stage of their careers. That the idea of connecting to something that had a longer time span than their own lives, that was there before and would be there after, and being a contributor to that institution building of something like Yale was of interest to them. And they thought about it some. And we're very grateful for the platform that the Yale identity gave them outside the university, that it certainly opened doors and framed people's perceptions of them without data, and that was useful. Fourth thing we talked about was the concept of patriarchy, which I won't talk about, but that it was a motivator for each of them. These are men, and how this would be different in a group that was mixed gender, all primarily women, is something that they were very interested in but had no data on. The idea that they were senior members of the tribe and responsible for increasingly in their families for not just their kids but all the kids, nephews, nieces, cousins, and so forth. And that felt invigorating but also challenging for them within their family lives and so forth. One of the burdens that it added was a very strong responsibility to protect the good name of the family. We spent a lot of time talking about the idea of honorability and reputation, and how at this stage of life, this late adulthood stage of life, being the keeper of that and not betraying that for the rest of the family was on their minds in ways they had never been when they were younger, when they were focused on their own career and advancement. This idea of reputation protection rather than reputation building, which was where they were in the decades that led up to this. The fifth thing we talked about was family. A lot of talk about family. Of the 10 sessions, we probably spent more than half the time talking about family rather than work. The challenge, and the realization, A, that the challenges of parenting were far from over at every age. That kids were grown, independent, but still needy. And that was a source of both satisfaction and worry. That grandchildren were a tremendous source of joy. I'll come back to the family one in a minute because it was part of the general statement. We talked some about physical issues. Pretty much everyone in the group had either a reasonable or a very significant health challenge of some kind or other that they didn't talk about, but as the group developed intimacy, began to talk more about. And the bottom line of this, which was very powerful, so I can't emphasize it too much, was that what scared them was actually not sickness or not even death. We didn't talk about death much because death was something that they were coming to terms with. What they worried about was disability. What they worried about was becoming dependent, and what that would mean to all the relationships they had with the people they cared about. And it was just, of all the things that we talked about for 10 weeks, I can't emphasize enough that was much more of an issue of anxiety. And all the other ones, sort of financial and role and career and so forth, were connected to the idea of building some security, some blanket, some platform, some way to fend off the potential for either sudden, traumatic, catastrophic, or gradual disability and incapacity. That was the fear. And finally, on the issue of legacy, we talked quite a bit about what is enough. when you approach late adulthood, what's enough? And how does the concept of enough differ from the concept you had at 35 or at 40 or at 45, especially at an incredibly high ambition, high achieving place like Yale? When if ever, do you have enough? And you can say, if nothing else happens, if I get not one more honor, not one more paper, not one more client, I have enough. And that, I wouldn't have any conclusions about that, but the reflection was powerful. So let me finish by talking about the bottom line. We spent our last session talking about what were our greatest fears, what their greatest fears. And they came to 4, some of which I've already talked about. The first one being something happening to one of our children, out of our control to prevent or ameliorate. Number one concern, the welfare of offspring, or either biological offspring or the generalized offspring of their family. Number one fear. And not being able to do anything about it was part of that. Number 2, uselessness, meaningless, incapacity. This issue of being dependent rather than that was the third one, being a burden on others. So the combination of those two. Instead of being a caretaker, being a consumer of care was high anxiety. And then the last one, this issue of a dishonor, of fearing letting down both ancestors and descendants, of being seen as not worthy or breaking the chain of honorability. So I'm trying to convey, the group did talk about work. It talked about career. It talked about staying in different roles, and we're going to get examples of the different ways people thought about their careers going forward. Those who decided to keep going on the path they were on as much as possible with minimal change until they had no choice. There was that group. There was a group who said, I'm ready now. I want to stay connected. I want to stay in the department. I want to stay related to Yale, but I want to do different things. I want to live a preferred life, not an obligation life. And there was that group. And then there was a group who said, I want to do something completely different. I want to use the platform, the financial security I've got, and so forth, to change my life and do something that I've wanted to do and haven't been able to do forever. So there's those 3. There is undoubtedly a 4th group, which didn't want to have anything to do with this place anymore. But they weren't in the room. And I'm sure they're not in this room either. So we don't know about them. But that's sort of a 4th option, the kind of, leave me alone, don't talk to me, I did it, I'm done here. We did talk about that. But what was the kind of the learning of the experience was how much they valued the opportunity to talk to each other in ways that no department and no university, no faculty really does very well. The idea to get to know each other as people, to share their life experiences, think about striving and so forth. It was put in terms of, that may be the gift of this stage, to be able to contemplate the wake of the boat even as we keep moving forward. And that's who we were, that's what we did. I think the department, I think Michael and the chair are thinking about, should we do it again? Should we do a different group? We're going to open it up again. Are there other people who would like to be a part of it with similar or different demographics and so forth? That's something that's part of the discussion going forward. Okay, now you've had enough to hear from me. I think I don't know what order we're going to talk about, but each of our 3 panelists, not all of whom were in the group, by the way, are going to talk about their take on this issue of retirement, preferment, this stage in their lives and in their work. And then we'll have a general discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Kellen. So I'm going to go first. The first thing I just would like to say one thing I disagreed with is that I enjoyed every moment I was here for 40 years. And that's true. I'm not making it up. I really did enjoy it. I enjoyed the research that I got to do every morning, and I really enjoyed being chairman. And there's some similarity in the two, in that you're problem solving all the time, whether you're a researcher or you're doing chairmanship. So I really didn't think about retiring at all until the 38th year or so, with one exception, and that is I did worry about the finances. I worried about whether I would ever be able to afford to retire, and if I did retire, how long would I be able to live on whatever I saved, and so on and so forth. And just to address that for a moment, so I did 2 things. The first thing was that I made sure that I took out of my paycheck every month that amount of money that would maximize whatever Yale was going to match. Because if you don't do that, you're leaving those dollars on the table. So you might as well, if you possibly can afford it, at least do that. The second thing I did was something a little different, and that is I tried to live at a standard of living level, one level below my last pay rise. And then I would save the difference, and then try to invest that wisely if I could. Now that's easier said than done. When you're putting kids through college, it fell apart. And it fell apart other times too when there were budgetary things that just didn't make it possible. But that also helped a little bit. So why did I retire? The reason I retired was very simple. It was following a model that my parents had demonstrated. And that is my dad retired early in order to have time to spend with my mom doing things that they'd not been able to do because he'd been working so hard all his life. And the key there was he wanted to do it while they were still healthy, while they still had their health. Because when we're young, we don't really think about we're ever going to get ill or ever going to have anything that's seriously wrong with us. But I guarantee you, at some point, if we live long enough, that occurs. And so I thought the same thing. I would like to retire and have enough time while my wife and I were both healthy to do the things we wanted to do. Well, now when you think about, when I was thinking about retirement, then I was thinking, okay, what do I want to do, though, when I retire? And I decided that I wanted to do something entirely different from what I had been doing. I wanted to go back to school and take courses in subjects that I had been interested in and wanted to learn more about, like geology and astronomy. I wanted to get my commercial captain's license because I had been a sailor all my life, and I wanted to learn more about navigation and the recent electronics developments and how to repair a diesel engine, believe it or not. So the second then choice and concern is where you're going to do this. And since my wife and I had vacationed in Maine for a number of years, and we loved Maine, we said, okay, let's move to Maine. So we did. So we picked up, pulled stakes, took everything, and moved it up to Maine. Now, I've had a grand plan for many of the things I wanted to do in life. Not one of them has turned out. And this one is going to be the same. We'd been there, the first winter, it was minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit with a wind chill factor of minus 40. The next winter, it was 135 inches of snow. And my wife, who was English, said, that's it. I think we're going to go back to Connecticut. So I stopped the course I was taking in being a captain, and we picked up stakes, and we moved back to Connecticut. Well, about that time, I got a call from an ex-resident that I had helped while I was chair find money to support him for his fourth year, joining the Yale Office of Cooperative Research to learn more about what he was eventually going to want to do and become an entrepreneur. This is one of our residents. And anyway, I got this call when we moved back to Guilford, and he had an idea. And the idea seemed really interesting to me. If it worked, it was going to make it potentially possible to bring mental health care to many, many more people than had access now, then. And it would mean we'd have to start a company. Now, I had been part of co-founding companies while I had been a chair. Some of them were my own idea, and then I found somebody to pay for it and somebody to run it. Most of them didn't turn out. But this seemed like something different. This seemed like a real challenge and a totally different career. And so I decided I would join him in developing this product, learning things I knew nothing about, patents and licensing and sales and hiring people for business and just a whole host of stuff. But it was, for me, it was really stimulating. It was really exciting. It was challenging. There were problems to solve every day. And we were our own boss. So I didn't have to report to, I think while I was chair, I had 4 bosses. that I had to report to. I didn't have to report to anybody, and our time was our own. We could spend whatever time we wanted on this. Of course, it turns out when you start a company, it's 60 to 70 hours a week. Who knew? So that was what we ended up doing. That has been incredibly satisfying to me. It has allowed, again, my wife and I to do some things we otherwise really wouldn't have been able to do. And it has allowed me now to continue, since I've learned enough, to continue to do that kind of thing. So I just want to leave you with two suggestions. The first one is something that's been mentioned before, well, they've both been mentioned before. The first one is, no matter how young you are, at least give some thought about the finances of retirement. Because the sooner you do that, the better off you're going to be when the time comes, and the happier you're going to be when you finally come to decide that you want to retire. And the second thing is, plan ahead, just as Kellen was saying. Figure out before you retire what it is you like. Even if it doesn't turn out and you do something different, like that was fine. And it can be as simple as doing hobbies. It can be as simple as doing something you enjoyed doing while you were a faculty member. You can get rid of all the stuff you didn't enjoy and continue to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we're going to, please, as you have questions, hold them. We're going to have a discussion at the end. But Steve, when we talked, wouldn't it be true also to add a third? Because you tell a story of full immersion, decades of full, total, enjoyable immersion in one thing, and the idea that the transition would lead to then the freedom to back away, to relax, to take classes, to explore, What happened instead was full immersion in Plan B, in number B, totally unanticipated, equally engaging, totally different. So what I think we learned, part of that is that your experience was that there's this issue of paying attention to the reality of the moment and being adaptable. Not holding to a plan that you carried for decades and holding it to it over the cliff through 20 below zero and a wife who was miserable there, but changing and trying something completely unanticipated. That was not something, you're never too old to make that kind of a right turn or a U-turn. Wouldn't you?
Well, I hope that's true, yes.
Well, you're living it. Okay, thank you very much. Different model, different story. Okay. George?
Hi. My story is straight. I think the easiest way to start that is I grew up in Provo, Utah, on the grounds of the Utah State Mental Hospital. My father was superintendent. I read the novel Aerosmith, idealistic physician that wanted to cure disease. The end of that story, he still kept wanting to do that and ended up in his old lab, in the backwoods of Vermont, doing that. And that idealistic kind of model has driven me. I graduated at the University of Utah in 1960, 4 years at Harvard, internship, residency, 2 years military obligation, public health service, and came to CMHC 1966 for its opening. 1967, Malcolm Bowers and I opened up the research ward, and then I've been 35 years there, chief and director of the Rivercroft Research Facilities. The transition to retirement came sort of as a push-pull. The push was I was involved in a neuroimmunology program, thinking that digitalis is not heart failure. The drug is not the disease. We weren't studying the disease, and that's why I went into immunology. I quickly found out that I wasn't trained and skilled, and it was a terribly difficult area. Just to give you the old joke, assistant professor runs into the chairman's office and says, "Sir, we're making great progress. We got a breakthrough. I got good news and bad news. We discovered the genes for schizophrenia. Bad news is they're in the immune system, okay? And that's pretty much where it was and where it stands. That is a terribly difficult system to understand pathogenesis. So I had to kind of give up that goal of understanding the pathophysiology of illness. At the time, I was involved in medical student education. Dr. Nestler had a course called Biologic Basis of Behavior, 7 lectures, clinical correlations. And the internet was just coming online, and I'd had some experience with computers. And I thought, well, gee, maybe a second choice, I can go to education and help medical students be educated. The reason for medical students, there's 15 times more physicians than psychiatrists. Most patients see physician first. So if you educate them, you can make things a lot better. The internet was good, and still is to my mind, useful. You can present the information, students can review it, you can modify it, and as a matter of fact, they all live there now. Students in the medical school, less than 50% attend lectures. What they do, they watch the podcasts, okay, in their dorm room. So that's the new model of learning. But the important point is that a thing called retrieval practice, which is essentially testing, and you can improve performance 50% by giving retrieval practice. So I wrote NIH grants, and we present the information, and then have quizzes sort of scattered throughout the lesson. So I've been involved in that since, and it's been probably a good 15 years. I just say a couple of mechanical things. Early retirement, I think they still have that, don't they? Yeah, I don't know. In my day, they had early retirement, got extra money if you retired early, okay? So you can take early retirement, then you can go to senior research scientist. So if you're a senior research scientist, you can apply for grants. So you got the best of both worlds. You don't have to go to committee meetings, and you could do what you want. You worked on what you're doing. What it's done for me is kept me involved in the content of what I'm interested in, and I still struggle with trying to get a deeper understanding. So in the actual content that we present, I try to avoid descriptive stuff so much and try to get into mechanistic and schematic models of pathogenesis, which involves me in getting lost in PubMed with all of the new literature, but forming that into something that can be transmitted. And I just say one example of that, Bob Holmer's lecture on cancer. The older definition was cancer's a lump, okay, so the new growth, neoplasm, okay. But there was a new definition, which is cancer's a clonal expansion of genetically altered cells. And I thought about that and like, whoa, what a great advance. That wasn't present in my day. But it gives you a model, a foundation of how to think about all the cancers and all the modern treatments, that immune therapies that are attacking this clonal expansion of genetically altered cells. And if you know the literature, it's fantastic what they're doing there. So that's what I'm doing at this point, struggling with that. I could say more about the actual mechanisms of the program, but I think I'll end with that.
Thank you. So as you see, a different psychological approach here is staying on a path and getting deeper and deeper into the new being creative and changing as the field changes, but staying in using the mechanics of the status, the roles available in order to stay in stream about the work, and that fits with who who he is as an individual, staying in, and the system, the system has allowed that to happen for him, staying in stream, not jumping to a different river.
Let me just say one thing you can think. This is attributed to Freud, but it occurred a lot earlier, and there's a famous quote which sort of summarizes the whole thing. If youth knew, if age could. And so the central issue when you get older and older and older is, and you want to stay on a straight line, which is mine, can you, and that's hard. I mean, it's just hard to stay there and be competitive more and more. And I think that influences people's choice of retirement, is how hard it is.
Thank you. Very true. Selby.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with these two distinguished neuroscientist colleagues. I actually listened to a slightly different drummer, not slightly, to a different drummer, and always thought of clinical practice as the cornerstone of my career in psychiatry. But not just any clinical practice with seriously mentally ill, disabled people, people with substance use disorder, in an organized setting, in the public sector. And I was always interested in, having just come out of the Peace Corps when I started my residency, in the public health aspects of psychiatry, the social aspects of psychiatry, and by extension, the organizational and management characteristics of psychiatry. And so that has pervaded my career, and it continues to drive my interest in my years of preferment, to use Kelly's term. I, like Steve, made very little preparation for retirement. 70 seemed like a nice round figure. I signed up for TIA Greth as soon as I could, put in it as much as I could. I did make a little family budget the year before I retired just to see if I could live within the assumed budget. I did a few other small things. And I hatched the idea that I needed something to do in the first few years. I was leaving the Connecticut Mental Health Center. I didn't want to hang around the Connecticut Mental Health Center and get in the way. And so I developed the idea of writing the story of the Connecticut Mental Health Center, but in the context of the community mental health center movement since 1963. So I retired thanks very much to Bruce Wexler, who referred an editor to me. I was able to find a publisher, and it was principally solitary work over the first couple of years. I sat at home. I set up a little office, and I wrote, the book Inside Public Psychiatry, which is the story of the Connecticut Mental Health Center. Let me say, I wanted to say something else by way of introduction, which is, you can think about retirement as a continuous experience, but it's not. It's not monolithic. It's not the same thing forever. It changes considerably from year to year with opportunities, with your understanding and so on. And that's been very much true for me too. I would identify three phases. I just talked about the first one, where I was holed up writing. With that done, it was published in 2011. I began to think of what I wanted to do next, and I very much wanted to return to clinical practice if I could, but not in private practice. I wanted to do it here or in a setting like this. And so I began to talk to people about doing that. I'd also like to say by way of introduction, and this is a major theme, that what I've done in the last 8.5 years of preferment simply would not be possible without the help and support of a lot of people here at the Connecticut Mental Health Center and the Department of Psychiatry. I counted them up, and they're close to 90, and I can't mention. I'm so grateful. Can't. Funny thing to get emotional about. I'm going to mention a few names, and I see this as an opportunity to thank people. So coming back to the mental health center, Gene Steiner was instrumental in helping me find a place to work. I resumed therapy with Dr. Cole. He's had me in therapy for 20 years, and he doesn't think I'm making any improvement. Actually, I think I've had him in therapy for about 20 years. And I think there's small improvement. And a number of other people. I began working in the Hispanic clinic, and my colleagues there were just terrific. I mean, Esperanza and Luis, Hector, and Michelle. And I was away on a trip to Ireland and hatched the idea. Oh, by the way, so the first book, really, I was thinking about the 50th anniversary of the Community Mental Health Center movement, which occurred in 2013. So I was in Ireland, I was thinking, well, what next? And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to do something to sort of commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Connecticut Mental Health Center? And developed the idea of writing a textbook. And came back and then began to talk to people about that possibility. Well, I originally thought I was going to do this on my own, which was unrealistic. And once again, Gene and others stepped up, and in the end, 74 members of this department contributed to that textbook. And it's called the Yale Textbook of Public Psychiatry, appropriately named. And that was a 3-year project. It was very exciting and published in 2016 after a lot of work. I had an editorial board, Sam and Larry Davidson and Tom Styron, and, oh my goodness, Howard, and there were 8, Tom McMahon, I'm missing several. That was wonderful, supported the work, 74 contributors, unbelievable. Which, by the way, got a rave review in the American Journal of Psychiatry in September. If you haven't seen it, you guys who contributed, look it up. And there's at least one department that has it as required reading for their residents. I don't know if that's true of this department, but a distinguished department has made it required reading. Well, so we finished the book in 2016, and I was deeply involved in clinical practice again, and I had this nagging feeling that something was missing from the book after we finished it. And I became interested in the idea of healing relationships. And that's what I've been working on for the last couple years. And I'm still working on it, and I have a working paper, and I'm trying to find opportunities to teach about that. So, you know the old Western, have gun, will travel. I have a paper, and I will teach if anyone wants to talk about healing relationships. I did a number of other things over the 8.5 years of preferment. I became more involved in volunteer board work with the Yale Club of New Haven, with the Yale Alumni Service Corps, and with the CMHC Foundation. And that really got me involved again in the university. I met a lot of great people through that, made new friends. One of my experiences there involving Catherine Duman, she joined our board, and we decided to get involved with Elm City NAMI. And in that process, we met Claire Behan, who wanted to write a book about her experiences. And so we read that manuscript several times each and made editorial suggestions and supported her. And she published in 2013, Hearing Voices, Living Fully. So there were these unexpected sort of surprises in what we were doing. In any event, to conclude, I mean, as I think back, George made a comment at one point that he hadn't really spent a lot of time looking back. And I agree with that completely. I haven't spent a lot of time in the last 8.5 years looking back. But this group was terrific. It really was a terrific group. And that's what it fostered. And this conference made me think about it again. And so, I mean, I wonder if this experience, this group experience, might not be useful for other people in their 60s and 70s. I wonder whether thinking through more carefully institutional connections for them. For me, it sort of happened naturally. It grew out of my connection to the Connecticut Mental Health Center. It's a little bit harder, I think, if you're at Yale New Haven Hospital. I think it's a little bit harder if you're an individual entrepreneur in a research program, you know? I mean, you're sort of out there on your own. This became clear in the group. But thinking about those kinds of connections, and I wonder whether maybe, I can't tell who's out there, is Bob Rohrbaugh here, whether this might come in under Bob's office, you know, because we sort of, if there's a unifying theme to what I've heard, it's educational. And, you know, there's this Kerner Center at Yale, which I investigated, one of the things I looked into before I retired. And it just didn't make sense for me where Yale faculty emeriti get together and talk about their work. But a similar kind of thing within the Department of Psychiatry where people could get together and talk about their interests and learn from each other might be sensible. And it might make sense to do it under Bob's office. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So that, you know, this third model, you know, stay in the stream, do something totally different, or reinvent, redetermine the connection to an institution, to a place, in a different role, but in the same place, and return to, in some ways. By the way, the group was, as you can imagine, quite emotional, and for different things. For somebody, it was talking about a child with special needs, or for some, it was about how unbelievably cold it was at Bain. Different things would bring people to emotional, or work. You know, what it felt like to be honored for a piece of work that others thought you were past. So here's the deal. The lights are on not just logistically, but conceptually. The idea being that this Grand Round, as opposed to, I guess, what most of them are like, was supposed to be, as much as possible, a dialogue. And we've done, this has got to be a first, that everybody held to their time limit, and in fact, we do have half an hour left for conversation. The idea was to have a dialogue back and forth. Questions to these three, questions to each other, people in the room. What would be useful? What is it that you can learn from the path that's been created by people who are further down the road? What would be useful for the department to do? It could be about financials. It could be about career. It could be about role. It could be about opportunity for conversation. And what does this mean to those of you at different stages of your adult development and of your career life and so forth? And what else do you want to talk about? So I'm counting on you all to, let's talk. Everyone here has graciously said all questions are welcomed. So who's got a question? Jack.
I'd like to pose this question to the panel.
And speak up because they're trying to record it. So can you hear it back there? Is it going to work? Okay?
You can repeat the question, that'd be good. Repeat it.
Okay.
So pose the question to the panel. Can you talk a little bit of how you've integrated family, extended family, into your various retirement preferment activities?
How have you integrated extended family into your various retirement plans?
Well, I mean, I also have to say thank you to my wife, Ann, who let me back in the house, you know, and made space for me. And I've taken a great interest in her career. She's a visual artist represented by GM Petro here, and we spend a lot of time in the Yale University Art Gallery. I mean, listen, New Haven is this fantastic university town. There is so much going on here. I didn't mention it, but we spend a lot of time at lectures, in the art gallery, going to musical events, and so a lot, and she leads me into a lot of that. I have two daughters, one's in Burlington and one's in Chicago, and so, you know, we visit them regularly, but they're not directly integrated into our lives here in the New Haven area.
I don't think I do much. I think it's pretty much been the same equation the whole time. I go home and wife gives me dinner.
An honest answer.
So, yeah. So two of my children, one is in DC and one is in Chicago, but one of them is here, and she's much younger than the other two, so we have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old grandchild. So that automatically, and they live very nearby, so that automatically integrates everybody, that whole group, into our daily lives. It's interesting that when she was not married, excuse me, she was not married at the time, so when we moved to Maine, you know, we weren't any further from Chicago, a little further from DC, and she wasn't married, wasn't sure where she's going to live, so that didn't enter into the equation at all at that time. And it's actually turned out, obviously, to be very fortuitous to come back to Connecticut, since she got married, lives here, and we now have 2 other grandchildren.
Did that answer what, were you getting at something else, Jack, or?
Yeah, one of the things that, you know, a lot of the focus was on kind of career and kind of the pursuits one would have. But it's hard for me to think now differently about career versus family, you know, as I anticipate several years down the road is happening. And so it's how that kind of equation, how that thinking went about kind of self versus family, spouse, family, those kind of dynamics. Maybe that's not relevant.
I did say most people in academia get put in these 60, 80-hour work weeks, and when you retire, that you can modulate that. So there's lots of time, and it's happened for me. High school cross-country races that I go for the grandkids. I mean, there are things that you can do that you couldn't do before.
Yeah, I also think it depends on kind of the history of the family. So I come from a family where all the children, just 2 of us, my brother and myself, just, you know, totally changed, went away from where my parents were, and we're very, didn't see them very often, talked to them on occasion, got together in Maine every summer, etc. But that was it. So it was not part of the culture to have an extended family that would, you know, that would draw you together at all. And in fact, it's become now it's actually what I would call improved with this new younger child.
And I would add that you take a lot of interest in your children, and you follow their family life and you follow their careers. And curiously, both of my daughters work in large organizations, and so they're very curious about, they come to me often with questions about how they're doing in the organization and how to look at it and how to develop and so on. And so my knowledge of organizations, my interest in organizations really is directly relevant to them. That's very gratifying.
Okay. Is this working, by the way? Does this mic work as well? No?
I
Okay.
think that's for recording.
Okay, so I will say that the group as a whole, there was variation in the group as a whole, and in the other work I do with other senior groups, but in general, it's clear that this cohort, their children, their families are more present in their lives and in their considerations of what to do with their lives than they experienced their fathers being or their parents being in their lives. That their experience of the retirement of their fathers was they worked as long as they could, financially motivated primarily, and then they kind of withdrew to, you know, the den, the TV room, the local pub, whatever. They didn't. That was what retirement meant. It meant no longer spending their days at work, but not necessarily spending more of it with the family. This group as a whole felt wherever they had grown up, they were a step or two further down the line of the family being very consequential and central to the way they thought about things. But I'll tell a real quick story about retirement in general. I was working with this family, and this is a business leader, and he was ready to retire and ready to stop coming in every day and turn the reins over to someone else. Everybody was supportive of it except his wife, and nobody could figure out why. So I was I was talking to her in private in their house once, and she said, look, last Friday, I have an active life. I work with the library. I'm a professional. I do things. But last Friday, I was making lunch, making my tuna fish, and all of a sudden, my husband, who no longer now goes in on Fridays, was standing behind me, telling me that I wasn't dicing the celery fine enough. And I'm thinking to myself, do I want this? He's used to directing things. He's used to directing his lab and his company. Do I want to become his lab now for the rest of it? So it is a renegotiation of the family dynamics that people say in many important. If your family is important, then it is a renegotiation. As your work life changes, you move one piece, other pieces get moved. So there was another question here. Yes, please.
I'm interested in the issue of timing of retirement, and in particular how you decided when was the day, and as you look back, do you wish you had retired earlier, or do you wish you had retired later?
Great question. The question is about the issue of timing. As you look back about how you decided when was the appropriate time to start your transition, do you wish you had done it earlier or later or right on time? How about timing?
I definitely did not want to do it earlier. I think it was the right time. I didn't have some idea, as Kellen was referring to, that I was going to go do something I'd always wanted to do. I just wanted to stay here. I love where I live. I love the university. I feel very much a part of it. I love the town. I mean, it was just the right time.
Yeah. So I think I talked about the motivation before, that I wanted to retire so I'd still be healthy with my wife and do things. The actual time was dependent upon our ability to sell the house in Guilford so we'd have some money to be able to have a house in Maine. And when that happened, I told the dean, that's it, bye.
There's a quote that Yale University presidents make from Rabbi Tarpon, which is, you're not required to finish the work, but neither are you free to desist. And that's been widely publicized. And Giamatti did one better. He says, continue to choose to continue. So for me, the emeritus was just a transition. It wasn't a retirement. It was the same thing. Given my druthers, sure, I'd like to have $200 million a year and run a huge research operation, but I can't. And so you take what you can get when you can get it. And in terms of what the department could do, there should be a website with, just the mechanics of something about the formula for how much you need to save to do such and such, and how to do investments, and the whole issue of retirement and research scientist appointments, different opportunities, and that information would be available to people in the department.
Yeah, I think the sense of the group was there is no best practice, that lives are very individualized, but the idea of more detailed, more nuanced data about if then, if you this is your they all felt would have been helpful, and my guess is people here would feel it would be helpful. Next question? Yes, please.
So one of the things you brought up at the beginning was the issue of being concerned about health-related issues later in life and the sort of burden. And so my question is, how does accessing the healthcare system, how is that affected by retirement? And do you feel in your retirement that you have better access, the same access, or poorer access to health care?
Okay, so the question is about health care, and the question at the end was, in retirement, do you feel you have better, the same, or worse access to resources for health care than you did when you were in the routine of your faculty appointment?
really depends on your health insurance plan. I'm a member of the Yale Health Plan, and I just continued. Now, there was a change because after retirement, you no longer have access. You have access to primary care, but it's very hard to get access to specialty care. And so you use your contacts in other departments and your name, and you get those appointments, but it is harder. And it also reminds me of a story I heard recently about two 80-year-old sitting around talking, and two 80-year-old academics sitting around talking, and one looked at the other and said, "Oh, to be 70 again."
Yeah, well, this is one of the kinds of things that could be on the website. Different people have different things. When you're on full-time faculty, that's sort of built into your deductions. I've taken special care to make sure that I've got my health insurance, because I'm spending a lot more than I'm putting in, okay? And so that's a critical issue, but I think it depends on which person and which healthcare system you're in, but it would be helpful to have that information in the guide of possibilities too.
Well, you learn things every day. Hello?
Yeah, it's on.
Is it? Okay. I didn't know you could be on the Yale Health Plan,
Yeah.
which is very interesting to me. And I have insurance that I got from Yale, but it's not the Yale Health Plan. And for me, at least, whatever that benefit is very good. I mean, I have access to specialists that I need and so on and so forth with no problem.
Maybe either one of you or anyone in the audience, if for those people who have a chronic need for health care, a chronic disease, or something acute, did it for any of you, did thinking about those issues affect the timing question for you of when you could or when you should change status? Was access to health care one of the figures or not? Not.
But health very much, I mean, maybe we could say a little bit more about health. I mean, it gets into personal issues at this point, I mean, one of my big problems is vision, and I'm slowly but surely losing it to macular degeneration. And so it's providing care for that, but that's become a major constraint now on what I do and what I'll be able to do over the next 2, 3, 4 years. So the more I get into it, certainly in this latest current phase of my preferment, that is a big preoccupation for me, worth thinking about.
Great.
Well, I'll just say that as you age, the medical bills just pile up, okay? And so a good health insurance system is really imperative. Otherwise, you go broke. You're in the hospital for a few days, thousands, $100,000, just like that.
Okay, there was another question right behind. Yes, please, speak up.
It's been a privilege to listen to your rich life experiences. One of you said that you knew at age you could, and I was wondering, is there something you wish you knew in your early 30s that you now know?
The big question, is there something that you wish you had known in your 30s that would have changed the course of your decision-making or your lives?
Yeah, I said that.
Yes.
Yeah, I wish I'd known to invest in Microsoft, Apple, or Google. I'm struck with age and experience. When people start with a particular concept, that has to do with what they do thereafter. And so I was thinking about what could have I done back then? And my goal, obviously, is to say it's a liquid biopsy that measures the molecular constitution of the brain, and then we track disease and aim our treatment exactly at it. You know, and that's being done in cancer now. I had the general notion that that was possible, but the technology wasn't there. So I'd say that we're all limited in youth by what's available. We can be led far off track by the wrong, inefficient concepts. In this room, when I was here, Ted Litt stood up and said there's no genetic cause of schizophrenia. There's no evidence for genetics in schizophrenia. That was that seat right there. Okay, so you know you can be wrong when you're young, but I guess my point is that if you have a scheme that can take advantage of the best information, then you can maximize that. Obviously.
Okay. Steve?
Yeah, just briefly, I think I mentioned I had a lot of grand plans, and not one of them worked out. And I think it would have been nice to have known that even if things didn't work out, something else would. And it turned out that that's the case, but I think it's something that at least when I was young, you know, you don't know. You have this grand plan, then it blows up, and then you find yourself doing something else. In the end, you just kind of learn to follow your nose. At least that's what I did, and just, you know, try to take advantage of whatever came along. But I don't think of anything that I wish I knew other than that.
Yeah, I just say one thing for young people. This is what I'm trying to do in education: is you give them a conceptual system that opens up the possibilities. Okay. And when I just quoted Ted Litt and my early training in psychodynamic Freudian psychology did not open up those possibilities. If you believed in that and followed that, you didn't have the possibilities. And so my only point is that for youth to know they need a scheme that keeps the possibilities open.
But I want to emphasize what Steve said, that because, you know, it's not a straight line. There's some, you know, there's some failures and some dead ends, and you just keep going and develop, you know, the opportunity that is hand, or abandon something that is a dead end, and so, you know, just you have, for a long career, you have to be flexible and just keep working, go to work every day.
So I'm going to take the facilitator's chair here and take the prerogative and ask a question back to the audience, because there's a topic that was very much a part of our conversation that this audience would be perfect for. And that is that the group was very self-conscious about being a very privileged and non-representative subgroup. These are very successful, senior, high authority, white males in this place. And here's an audience that is almost half female, you know, and so I think the group was very interested, and I know that John Crystal was from the beginning. What do you think would have been different in the conversations, in the topics, in what we ended up talking about, in the conclusions we came to, in the issues that turned out to be important? And is there anything different that needs to be attended to? Any other issues that may not have come up with these guys, but that would come up if the demographic was different of the seminar, or if the department focused more, all right, on issues of, I mean, you know, it could be gender, it could be ethnicity, anything other than senior white guys. Okay, got a couple of hands. Fire away, eager to hear.
I wanted to talk about mentorship. I am a PGY2 in the Department of Residence. I'm from Ecuador. And as I went to medical school, and most of my professors were white. I came to residency, and as I climbed through my residency ranks, I find fewer and fewer people like me. And this has been the experience also of my colleagues, female colleagues, colleagues from gender minorities, and colleagues from socioeconomic status that are not usually represented in careers like medicine or privileged careers. So I wanted I appreciate your experiences, and I wanted to know what the role of mentorship was and how, what advice you have for us, for people who, as you climb the ranks of academia, you find fewer and fewer people like you who don't share your concerns, who might dismiss some of your concerns. So what is your advice?
It's a great question. And because our time is very short, instead of answering that question directly, I'm going to gather a couple of the questions on this theme, and then they can answer them together. So do you want to add your theme? And talk loudly, because I'm trying to capture you here.
Sure. For a similarly ambitious person who also has a uterus and is producing a family, I just wonder how that would interact with some of the goals before. I believe what you call this the preferential years in your life, and how it would affect them after. So for someone that's producing a family in residency, caring for that family throughout their most productive years of their career, and then figuring out how to navigate retirement, how would that change for a different year?
Okay, so to paraphrase, so with all the issues of trying to be gender neutral, in fact, what are the experiences of mothers different from the experience of fathers? And that is the issue of raising a family here, having children. What are their thoughts about how that would affect the issues that we're talking about? Is that, did I hear you?
I'll expand it to just people with a primary caregiver role.
Primary caregiver role.
Male or female.
Great.
In my particular situation.
Great. Is there a third question about this, and then we'll deal with all three at the same time? Yes, go ahead.
As an immigrant coming in, obviously we are not immigrants. As an immigrant coming into this country, having to straddle two worlds, you know, have family abroad, have family here, trying to understand the culture, trying to learn, and yet trying to advance to the levels of success. You know, I just wondered how the story would have been if we had a couple of immigrants trying to talk about how they struggled through the system and how they, either succeeded or didn't succeed, or how they learned to immerse while still, as they have a whole family, you know, all over the world that you're still sort of responsible for in some ways, responsible here, and still trying to grow your academic career.
Okay.
I just wondered how that would have played out in a discussion.
So excellent. So we have the issue of mentorship and across categories, across boundaries of difference, of me-you differences, issues of primary responsibility for childcare, raising a family, issues of immigrant and sort of cultural dislocation and all of that. Gentlemen, have on. Easy issues that the...
Well, you know, we're largely drawing on our experience in this group for elderly white men, and you're asking questions about career development that we really didn't address, I'm sorry to say. Now, it may sound like I'm ducking the issues. Obviously, mentors and the challenges for a mother who's also having a full-time career. Trust me, I have 2 daughters doing it. I understand it some, and the immigrant experience are parts of career development that we don't have any, I mean, I don't have any special expertise to offer there. I wish it had been part of the group. You know, but it wasn't, and so maybe the next group can incorporate that in.
Yeah, I would just say the same thing, I think, and that is this is a subject for grand rounds, really. I know there are models in this department, wonderful models in this department, of women who have been able to do both. But you need to hear from them, and you need to hear what it takes to be able to do that. And in terms of the immigration, that's a whole other story which needs to be addressed, but I do not have experience with it, but I think it is a subject that ought to be thought of in a grand round or in some milieu that allows this to be discussed. Obviously, it's difficult, for sure. And mentorship, I've had, something I didn't talk about was the influence of mentors on my life, which were great. And in some cases led to those grand plans that didn't work out. And I certainly had mentors who came from different cultures and ethnic groups than myself, and who were very influential on some of the decisions I made and the type of training, actually, that I decided to get. So that's the best I can comment on that.
George, you have something?
I don't have much to say. It's a social responsibility of the department to provide opportunities, and so I agree that rounds on each of these topics would give illustrations. I think to different degrees, we all have that in our life. Namely, you can be the son of a great quarterback, but when you try out for the team, you got to play. Okay, you can't go on your reputation. You got to perform, and so somehow building the opportunity to prove yourself by performance and providing support so people can do that is like a departmental responsibility.
Did you, Sylvia, you have something else you want to say? So, I mean, I think, I'm glad we ended on that note, because what it more than anything does, and Michael's here and Sam is a kind of communicators back about what was talked about today, that these are issues that need to be noticed, you know, the attention paid, that there are different experiences here, and that a format found to further the discussion, to take the discussion to the next level, and to address them and think about the lives that each of you bring into your careers here in this department, and the department's obligation is, as you said, to pay attention to the whole person trying to make a life in this work. After all, we are in the psychiatry department. If we don't pay attention to that stuff, who will? So thank you all. We come to the end of the time. First of all, I know you all want to thank these three individuals for putting themselves, not just as what they do and their research, but themselves in front of you in this way. So thank you all.